Hi. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been obviously assigned the important task to hold the fort for the last session of the evening. And when we were discussing and we were actually fine tuning the sort of topics that we want to do for InSpirit 2021, the last 1.5 year, as you might be knowing, it's really changed the dynamics of how the consumption patterns in terms of data, in terms of visual arts, in terms of whatever we do has changed. Because the pandemic essentially really opened the eyes for a lot of people where the consumption of digital content so as to increase, then it actually blew open in this past 1.5 year. Coming closer to the alcobev industry, now there have always been challenges when it comes to marketing or advertising in the alcobev industry, and those obviously have always been very pertinent when it comes to the ATL activities. Now, there is a very gray line when it comes to the digital, or rather, if we say, I wouldn't really count digital as some sort of a BTL activity because it functions as a completely different category or a vertical of its own. But from a perspective of where we are in terms of the marketing, there is a lot of gray area in terms of what really is okay and what really is not okay as well. So there are there are two or three things that we are actually looking to discuss today, and of course it's going to be as interactive as possible. So at any point of time, if any one of you also has any inputs or would like to share have any questions, then we'd be more than happy to address. But along with me, of course, I've got Mr. Hargun Singh, who's on my left, your right, who's the co-founder of Syrup Technologies. He's also, essentially, they are the ones who take care of all digital activities which are for Radico Khaitan. He will tell you a little bit more when he will be talking about that as well. And of course, on my right is Mr. Vishal Gaba, who's the Associate Director for Marketing, which is Bira Beverages, more popularly, obviously, as we know them as Bira. Just to get the floor rolling, I would firstly like to just ask Hargun if I understand that you have a couple of slides which you've prepared, so if you just like to take us through that, and then we can quickly jump on to a Q&A. Anyway, yeah, if that's, yeah, please go for it.
So it's actually a very interesting space to be in right now, digital marketing in association and empowering the alcohol industry, so to say. I remember walking into the Radico office about a decade ago, being a very small cog in the wheel. When I say me, I'm talking about digital marketing as an industry. And the alcohol space has been a very complicated space for marketeers across the board, whether it is digital or otherwise, given the challenges, whether it's state, marketing laws, or whether marketing laws and what is allowed, what is not allowed, like Bhavya mentioned. What is the kind of surrogates that the brands want to use? Do they want to use soda? Do they want to use water? Do they want to use music CDs, etc.? And the same kind of challenges or a different set of challenges have also been kind of popping up as far as the digital space is concerned. But like I mentioned, over the decade, from being a small cog in the wheel or a BTL activity like Bhavya mentioned, I think our time has arrived. The time for digital has arrived in the last, I would say, 5 years. And Radico has been very, very perceptive to that. From being, like I said, digital being a very small activity or small marketing sort of endeavor as far as the alcohol industry is concerned. Today, we've changed the entire strategy of digital for Radico as a digital first approach. So, and having said that, when I say digital first approach, I mean whatever we are trying as far as marketing is concerned, whether it's kind of content generation, the kind of content generation we are doing, the kind of surrogates that we are preparing, the kind of associations that we are doing, are all being led from the perspective of being digital first, in the sense that we want to present it to the audience on the digital platform first, test it out how the audience reacts to it, and then maybe take it to the mainline space of physical touch points. Now, having said that, the alcohol industry comes with its own set of challenges as far as marketing is concerned. However, there's a second leg of challenge which comes with the platforms that we are working upon. For example, social channels like Facebook and Instagram allow us to use bottle shots in some cases. Whereas YouTube and Google is very, very confusing, if you ask me. Sometimes they will accept bottle shots, sometimes they won't. But their general guideline says that they don't want to kind of push alcohol as alcohol, and they would rather do it as surrogates. So these are the kind of challenges that we have been facing in the last decade or so, and every single day, like state policies and state excise duties keep changing around alcohol, platforms also keep changing their policies as far as the use and push of alcohol is concerned. However, what we have been able to do with Radico for the last, like I said, a decade, we've been able to do a lot of surrogate marketing. For example, a brand like Magic Moments, which is very focused towards the youth, because it's a vodka brand. It has about 9 flavors. We've been able to kind of create digital surrogates, and not like a music CD or a soda or something of that sort, which runs in the mainline space. What we've been able to do as far as digital is concerned is create digital assets and digital mascots and digital surrogates, right? Which helps us to communicate to the digital audience in a very different way. For example, for Magic Moments, because they have 9 flavors, we've developed 9 different mascots, which represents the personality of each flavor. Talks about what is happening in the industry, talks about social commentary, talks about trending topics, helps us engage with our audience on a day-on-day basis. Versus, for example, let's say a brand like Morpheus, which is slightly skewed towards the southern markets, slightly skewed towards a slightly more mature market, where we don't want to talk about mascots. We talk about music CDs, we talk about the spirit of achievement, we talk to dreamers in a very sort of a different communication on social and digital platforms. Having said that, digital actually has been growing, like I said, for the last 5 years, but the pandemic kind of gave us an shot in the arm, because what people realized was that one, and I feel dearly for my friend, the gentleman who just presented earlier. I think if this does not opens up the eyes of the consumer, the governments and the people involved, then nothing will. Because we saw in the pandemic that there were people queuing up outside alcohol shops. The end consumer was not getting what they wanted. There was a huge hit taken by the excise duty, by the governments, and I'm sure by alcohol brands as well. So if this does not open people's eyes towards accepting digital as a platform of communication and marketing for the alcohol space, then nothing will. Having said that, we were able to do a lot of activities as far as digital is concerned. We did a party with DJ Akil through the pandemic, through the first lockdown, when the emotion was not as negative as the second lockdown. We brought the party to people's homes, where DJ Akil was playing live along with his gang of DJs coming in every week, creating touchpoints, creating loyalty with the audience. That property became so successful that people are now asking us for a reprise, and it's become a yearly property that we would like to kind of repeat. The other thing that we are now doing is actually creating loyalty. Bhavya initially mentioned that data has become really important. So what we are now trying to do is create physical touch points with the product itself, maybe putting a QR code which kind of leads to an activity or a landing page where people can come and interact with the brand. What it also allows us to do is to collect a database basis the brands that they are connecting via. So for example, somebody buying a bottle of Magic Moments has a very different personality from a person buying a Jaisalmer gin. What it allows us to do is to get them to a platform, associate with us, and then retarget them and create a connect for the longer run, thereby kind of creating some sort of loyalty. So what I'm basically trying to say is that digital is here to stay, and I mean it's going to be the future as far as communication and marketing is concerned, especially for the alcohol space.
Thank you, Hargun. I'll actually circle back to a couple of things that you mentioned. Before doing that, if I can just bring you in as well, Vishal. So, ideally, I mean, of course, Radico, as he mentioned, is more of their primary interest is, of course, IMFL and so on. But in complete transition, if you look at Bira, Bira is someone as a brand who initially had very strong word of mouth, and then they've really opened themselves up to associate with the younger youth, and then they've capitalized the digital and the social media sphere in that respect as well. So can you just tell us a little bit about that journey? Then we'll quickly move on to some of the other questions.
So yeah, I think you're right. First thing that I would want to point out, agree with a lot of things that you pointed out. But for Bira specifically, So for Bira specifically, I think the benefit that we've had is that we've always been a digital first brand, like you mentioned. The audience which has been on the platform has kind of matured with the way brand has progressed in the last 5 to 6 years. That's one. And our approach has been really simple when it comes to digital. We look at 3 aspects. What is the kind of reach any activity that we plan that'll give us? where is it that we should plan that initiative? So relevance is the second important element that we look at. For example, if you see our latest campaign, Make Play with Flavors, we went extensive with digital over there. Even the marketing in terms of our films, OTT was where our maximum attention was. We partnered with Hotstar through the ICC World Cup and through our partnership. And the third bit is resonance. So resonance is a combination of the first two aspects, which is reach and relevance. When you continue to interact with the audience online, show them your content, interact with them, engage them, there's a trust that's built. And I think through the last 5 years, that's the biggest achievement that I would call for us as a brand, that there is a lot of trust that we've been able to garner through digital platforms, which actually, if you look at a lot of other brands right now, a lot of brands are starting in that space. We've kind of thankfully started early and have a lot of mature audience with us on our side.
Hargun, coming to, as both the brands that you're talking about, especially post the pandemic, when you Radico changed their strategy probably to go digital first, and of course Bira since the initial days has been like that. From a perspective of moving forward in terms of communication, now I know that across most platforms, brands essentially, and I don't mean alcohol industry, I mean essentially from FMCG products and things like that, usually your digital acts as a parallel medium for communication where they're able to provide a 360-degree sort of a connect towards the consumer. But alcohol industry is extremely unique. Of course, surrogate is something when we go on to TVCs is something which is extremely poignant. Now when we come into the digital space as well, the general understanding, if you can just give it to our audience as well, in terms of the conversion value and the relevance of all the strategies. I also would like to come back a little later on the change in the regulators, where the platforms, they actually overnight just change a lot of things, which completely throws all of the communications across haywire. But from a conversion value standpoint, what are really the parameters, or what are the sort of benchmarks that you kind of look at, and are they really as indicative of what we can expect?
So, first of all, I want to point out the fact that this is something that I say to all my clients when I have a discussion with them. And I've been saying this for the last 15 years, that digital is a very quantified medium. There is no other medium where you can quantify things like the way you can on digital. For example, if you put up a billboard on a street, you cannot know how many people actually saw that billboard and actually went and bought your product, or even showed some sort of interest in that product. But with digital, the beauty is that one, you can talk to the consumer that you want to talk to. For example, you can define the age group, you can define the behavior, you can define a particular geography, which is very, very important as far as the alcohol industry is concerned. You can define the age groups, you can actually even define if they've been engaging with you in the past or not, or if they've been actually engaging with competitor brands. So that becomes a very, very important part, or factor as far as digital communication is concerned. Who are you talking to, right? The second part is the tracking. For example, how many people actually saw a particular piece of communication that you put out, how many people actually engaged with it, and how many people actually started engaging with your brand on a regular basis. So the factors basically, when you say what are the kind of benchmarks, all these other benchmarks, how many times is a particular person engaging with you, what is your share of voice? For example, if there are, let's say, 25 crore people drinking whiskey in UP, how many of them have you actually reached out to, and how many of them have actually been interacting with your brands and have then gone? It's very difficult to track how many people have actually gone and bought a bottle from the store, but we can definitely track how many people have started interacting with a particular brand on a regular basis. So these kind of become the sort of benchmarks, and like Vishal rightly said, resonance or share of voice becomes a very, very important factor as far as benchmarking and kind of analyzing what is the impact that your communication is making in a particular market for a particular brand.
And I think, sorry, just to add one point, there are a whole lot of benchmarks out there. You can take impressions, you can take engagement. The only thing that it all boils down to is what is that one or two things that you pick up as your benchmarks. Because if you go in all directions, like he said, digital has so many numbers and so much data that you can get, you can end up getting confused. So look at impressions, look at engagement. If that's what you think is your core when you interact with the audience, finalize that, and then any activity that you plan should focus on these two.
Before we move to the next question, I don't know if the PPT is still up there. If it's still up there, then we would request to kind of just go into the live feed, and we can actually move on from the PPT to the live feed. So coming to the question actually about the reason I kind of set the platform about trying to understand the conversion value is because the general thumb rule in the digital ad space, or rather the digital space, is anywhere between 1 to 2% is for a regular consumer FMCG sort of a brand. Now, of course, naturally, when it comes to the alcohol industry, we are probably that number kind of reduces maybe even further. If you guys can, Vishal, if you could first just give us a little bit of an idea if that is the case, or
So yes, it does. That's true, especially because in your regular brands, I am going and making a purchase, and then it's very easy for you to tell that this guy went out, made a purchase, and therefore this is the conversion value. In alcohol industry, it's again, it starts from the benchmarks, and then how you track that to your overall trials or sales ultimately. That's one. Having said that, I think one benefit that we have is, in our journey of becoming a lifestyle brand, we have a merch store, right? Where there is a lot of products, there are a lot of collabs that we do. We collaborated with this brand called Nico Bar, which is huge in the fashion space. So there is a conversion value that you can very easily attach over there, because they head to the merch store, make a purchase, and then it's easier for us. But that also gives us data for us to then target them for our alcohol products. So yes, it's otherwise it's of course it's not as good as selling probably a T-shirt, but definitely I think for us it gives us a larger value.
would you like to add something?
So actually, this has been a challenge for a very long time. Saying, okay, we've got share of voice, we've got engagement, we've got people coming and commenting or participating in the kind of content we are putting out there. But how do we actually track sales? And like Vishal said, Bira has done a fantastic job as far as their merch store, their e-com store is concerned. And that is one of the ways that they kind of create a touch point with their audience, where they can generate, kind of track how many sales are they able to generate on the merch store, and then take that data and use it to retarget their users for a longer term. What we in collaboration with Radico are trying to do is kind of actually drill down to how many people are buying which product at the store, and which is why we're actually working on a very robust, it should be live in the next 1 week or 10 days, on a very robust loyalty program where people can actually buy a product, scan a QR code, like I mentioned earlier, go to a landing page, and there are multiple activities for the user to get that then get involved. But what we're essentially trying to do is to track bottle sales at a wine shop level, and then bifurcate the audience basis the product they have bought. So for, like I said, the personality of an 8 p.m. user versus a Magic Moments user versus a Jaisalmer gin versus a Bira beer is going to be very different. And if we can somehow get that database of people who are actually buying that product at a wine shop, basis the product that they've bought, then we can actually use that data further to retarget them in terms of the kind of communication we want to push, the kind of product we want to push, any new launches that we're kind of pushing, and we might think that they are the kind of relevant audience for that particular product. So that's what we are all trying to kind of target towards. I'm talking about all of us as marketers in the alcohol space.
And I think the biggest advantage that the digital platform gives you is, like you mentioned about flavors. Our campaign has been all about flavors. So if you see somebody engaging with, say, a Bira Blonde Summer Lager content on BSL specifically, I know that this person, he or she, is actually into that brand, and therefore I can continue to target them with content around Blonde Summer Lager, not only for the product, but also for merch. So for me, the transaction value for each user becomes a notch higher versus your regular transaction value. So the opportunity of creating those brand advocates is extremely high on digital, and I think it's the most advanced medium to market your product than anything else.
Then would it be right to say that ideally, if a brand or the sort of producers or manufacturers who are present here or even in this industry as well, that the ideal game when it comes to looking at something which is on a digital platform should not really be in terms of looking at conversions from a sales point of view. It should probably be as a much bigger communication tool which allows you or gives you a lot more data to track, or probably, as you mentioned, retarget, or in future if you're trying to communicate something, if is that what the end goal should be at this point of time, and maybe in the future that can get a little bit bigger?
See, the way I see it, of course, it's very difficult to track. We've been saying that over and over again. Very difficult to track actual on-ground sales, but it is actually we are able to track share of voice or amount of resonance or amount of traction in terms of sheer communication that we're able to generate on the internet space. So yes, I don't think on-ground sales would be the right kind of benchmark, but what is the brand advocacy that you're creating? What are the kind of people who are actually becoming advocates for you by actually adopting the communication, adopting the brand, and not just the ones that you... So there are a lot of brand advocates that we are ourselves seeding in. Like, for example, if we are onboarding a celebrity, or if we are doing an influencer collaboration where, let's say, we're tying up with 20, 30 influencers, and they may be coming from different genres, different categories, and different sort of communication genres as well. But the real deal is how many sort of brand advocates are you able to create from the real audience? That, I would say, is one of the very important benchmarks to kind of consider as far as the success or failure of your creative communication or your digital communication is concerned.
Yeah. So, answer to your question, partly yes and partly no. I think, of course, you will target communications, but as long as you have a framework in place which brings you back to what you've been able to achieve, and then relook at it and then evaluate whether this is working, not working. The advantage, as I said earlier, that the digital platform gives you is that if a particular thing is not working for you, you can plan an immediate change, unlike any other platform that exists right now. So that's the biggest benefit. And testing consumer feedback, the advantage again here that we have is we're into the tap room, like we have a tap room in Bangalore. So that market, it becomes easier for us to test, because if people are visiting tap room, you get real-time feedback. You target them on digital then, and then they become your repeat customers. So I think it's just the way you look at it in terms of evaluating whatever framework you build for yourself. For example, a particular company would only be looking at impressions. That's great. If it's working for you, if you evaluate quarter on quarter and you see that impressions is linking to my business, great. Then I think then that's a framework that you would play with for at least the time that's coming ahead.
This is slightly off context from the kind of sales we're able to generate. I mean, I think 7-8 years ago, when we started off coldly on Facebook for Magic Moments Vodka in particular, we were only serving the Indian continent, so to say, Indian subcontinent, or the Indian space, so to say. But it was via the digital platform, Facebook, that we actually got an inquiry from Africa. And I mean, a person sitting in Africa had no other way to get in touch with us. And the only way that they could think of was Facebook. And via that communication, we were able to open up another market for us. I mean, there was just a query which was sent in, which we obviously forwarded to the right people in the system. And they took up the conversation, and they were able to crack open a market, Africa, just via a digital platform. If that isn't testimony to success of digital, then I mean, what is? You opened up a new country, forget about, just tracking sales in a particular region.
Great lead generation in that aspect. Absolutely great. So, would you say at this point of time, from Alcobev perspective, that have we reached like what percentage of exponential, or what percentage of growth with the limited sort of a scenario that we have currently? Where are we at, and how would that really change the market dynamics if a lot of these regulatory laws, when it comes to online or when it comes to a lot of the platform challenges, if they were to change, what would that next future, or what would that change be, essentially, Vishal?
So I think it's very difficult to quantify. That's one. And regulators, like he mentioned in the beginning, regulators and these social media platforms, they change their rules like overnight. So Facebook will allow you to advertise products one day, the next day it won't. And Google, I think, is then it's fairly simple. They kind of don't allow any kind of advertising. If all of this were to stop, I think there will be some way or the other that we will figure out, considering we are marketers and this is our job. We would figure out a way to still engage with the users. But for Bira specifically, we have a great community right now. So at this stage, there are different touch points that we've already built. So it would be, I mean, the journey will still continue. But having said that, if the restrictions are eased, I think the engagement levels can go way, way higher. And not just in terms of sales. It's not always about sales. It's also about the experience that a person gets when they interact with your brand, whether it's online, whether it's offline, retail, at a restaurant. If the experience is seamless, I think that's where you have a win.
Of course, I mean, there's no, naturally the objective of the conversation that we're having is not just to understand the conversion value, and of course not everything leads down to sales, because as digital, essentially it is a brand building exercise. It is basically creating that resonance, as you said. Hargun, would you like to add something to the...
I completely agree with what Vishal just mentioned, that we've already worked upon creating touch points, whether it's through digital properties that are going to run on a day-on-day basis, on a weekly basis or a yearly basis. So we've already created those touch points. However, for example, social media today, Facebook and Instagram allows us to use bottle shots, like I mentioned, but Google doesn't. I think Google is confused. Sometimes they do. So sometimes YouTube will accept a video which has a bottle in it, and sometimes it doesn't. So we're also very confused with it. However, having said that, the real product obviously is going to be a better pull, a much harder pull for the end audience. I mean, we don't want to, we ourselves as marketers, because of surrogates, sometimes confuse our audiences. Sometimes surrogates become so big that it becomes bigger than the brand. So we don't actually want to do that at the end of the day. We actually want to sell the product, and our job at the end of the day is obviously to spread awareness and educate the end consumer, but is also to generate ROI, which can only happen once these regulations ease out. We are able to sell through e-com portals, which is when trackability and quantifying things will become much easier. And even actually using data, the way we use data will become much more effective.
That'll actually, I mean, then that'll change the space completely. If that's done, it'll, like, the next level that we are talking about, it'll be very easy for us to achieve that. And then we can give you a specific number for the conversion value as well.
No, I mean, it's not, as I said, it's not just about the conversion value, because naturally, in general, overall, in terms of the digital advertising, it's always a challenge. The reason is because you obviously have the impressions, you always have specific audiences that you can target, but it's a big challenge anyways, even for the regular categories. So I can completely understand the challenges that you all face with communication or with targeting specific categories. But at this point of time, if there are any questions which are also there in terms of coming in from the audience, then we would love to take that. Can we please ferry the mic to the two gentlemen? While they're doing that, Hargun, I actually have a very specific question when it comes to marketing on digital space for a company like Radico. Now, they are, of course, Bira in that sphere is a lot easier, because as a brand, it is just probably a handle which will be like Bira91 on Instagram and on Facebook and so on. But Radico in that respect has a more challenging scenario, because they have multiple brands, so they would have to have multiple handles to be there, and then of course that much of the reach becomes a little bit. How do you deal with that?
I think Bira has a distinct advantage as far as the internet is concerned, because if you look at the target audience, is skewed heavily towards the age group of 25 to 45. Sure, there are younger users and there are older users, but people who actually use the internet for a daily, for just existing, buying products, going to work, checking emails, just generally existing in life, is very heavily skewed towards 25 to 45, which is a fairly younger audience, which is why Bira, like I said, has a distinct advantage, which is why if you look at Magic Moments vodka, which is again skewed towards a younger audience, the community building has been far easier the brand has reached out to a much higher, much larger audience as far as the internet space is concerned. Today we have over 500,000 followers on Facebook, about 30 to 40,000 followers on Instagram, and this has all been organic as far as Magic Moments is concerned. But if you look at a brand like Morpheus, for example, which is a brandy, which in any case is very has not been accepted by the Indian audience. When I say Indian audiences, I specifically mean the North Indian audiences as of now. Forget digital. If you just look at brandy as a product for North Indians, it's a drink which is had in the winters when you're feeling very cold or if you have a cold. And it was a very funny story. One of my cousins actually went to the pharmacy to look for a bottle of brandy because apparently there was a brand called Doctor's Brandy which is sold at the pharmacy. So, for a brand like Morpheus, it becomes very difficult not just for digital marketers but marketers in general. However, the advantage that internet brings us is again that we can target specific regions, specific age groups, specific personalities, specific behaviors. For example, like I mentioned, Morpheus is a brandy which is brandy as a product in generally is skewed towards the southern markets because these were all French and Portuguese colonies back in history, and that is why they become all beer drinkers like the northern markets have become whiskey drinkers because of the British impact. So what we have been able to do is specifically target southern regions for Morpheus. I use a lot of vernacular content because some of the regions are very, very vernacular schooled. They don't want to talk, they don't understand Hindi, they sometimes don't even want communication in English. So we've been able to do a lot of vernacular communication as far as those regions is concerned. Again, we've been able to target specific age groups and specific behaviors as well. So as far as digital is concerned, it becomes an advantage. But however, it is a challenge. As far as growing communities is concerned, because specific communities, specific age groups, specific products will do better than the other ones, depending on the kind of personality of people that they want to target, or the age group that they want to target, or even the regions that they want to target.
Especially if you're looking to make it organic, it's even more challenging.
Yeah, also because there's overload of information, right? Everybody is targeting that one person, and there are multiple brands across industries who are looking to target those same consumers. So one point of time, there's a very high chance that the consumer gets irritated with those conversations.
Okay. So you had a question?
Yeah, right. As Vishal has discussed this digital fatigue just now. My point is, I want to understand one point. Why is it so that in India and digital platform, we use less of UGC and we use more of influencers? In Western countries, we see the equal, 50-50 kind of UGC also, influencer. Here in India, we see only influencers.
Okay, so your question is why do brands use more influencers versus UGC? So it's not true for us. We use a lot of UGC, in fact.
I'm generally asking about the alcohol industry.
Yeah, okay. So the reason for that is the fast track of visibility and credibility that influencers will give you vis-a-vis a consumer. Also, I think there's a journey that every brand is in. So if I, as a brand, get 50 people posting their pictures with my product, I will not need influencers. I will not need them as heavily as I would at the beginning of my journey. So I think it purely depends on where you are in your journey as a brand. When you're starting out, you have the money to probably look at fast tracking your visibility with the audience. There are means that you would use, like, a lot of people go on TV because it's as deep as you can go in India, vis-a-vis maybe a print ad in an English newspaper. So it depends on where you are in your journey, and then for us, as I said, a lot is 50-50, and it depends on if there's a particular campaign where I feel there's a requirement of engaging with influencers and that will give me a wider reach. We pick that over your UGC, and UGC is something that you cannot trigger, right? It's pure love that you get from the audience, and it takes time. It cannot happen overnight. So I think that's the reason maybe why you would have felt that there is a lot of celebrities or influencers promoting a particular product versus consumer post. And also, a very simple question as a consumer. You might follow a Saif Ali Khan, but you might not follow that consumer who's posting with that product. So the visibility, and that's the reason Black Dog is working with Saif. so that you see that product. So I mean, yeah, you can add to it, but that's what I feel.
I would like Hargun also to answer this.
Actually, I don't agree with the question because it's not like as marketers we are not working towards generating UGC. In fact, there's a clear mandate when boardroom meetings happen, and I'm sure it's the same with Vishal as well, that there is a clear mandate that we have to kind of drive UGC in a big way. One of the wins for a brand, I would say, is how much UGC and love that they're able to generate via their brands. Which is why I always, if you look at, again, but it also depends on the kind of brand you're dealing with. For example, an 8 p.m. audience or a Morpheus again would not really get into creating UGC for you. We've tried giving them gratification also, still they don't do it. But an audience like for a Magic Moments vodka, which is very young, very peppy, very with the trends, you won't believe, out of let's say 4 to 5 communications or sort of posts that we put out on social media, 2 to 3 are every week is via UGC. And the kind of UGC that we get is phenomenal. People actually get down to creating videos, creating cocktails, playing with lights. So, I mean, creating great content, just not around the brand, but the product itself, the bottle itself. So, I mean, it's not fair to say that we are not in the alcohol space, getting into the UGC space. I mean, even if you look at Absolute, they did a very cool campaign called the Made in India. I'm not able to remember the name of the campaign, but the whole idea was that they asked the audiences to kind of redesign or design or paint the bottle with the theme of India. And people went crazy about it. There was so much UGC they were able to generate. It was quite a success story as far as one of the campaigns that they did. I mean, it was quite a success story for them.
Yeah, I understand your question, and if I may just add, so if you see the dynamics of digital as such as a medium is very personal on certain platforms. For example, if you take an Instagram, then the reason why influencers are used much more probably than any other aspect is because their followers connect with whatever they are doing, which automatically gives the associated brand instant reach. And the dynamics of also how a consumer behavior works on digital media is very unique. For instance, you might be consuming content from A, B, C, and D users or brands and XYZ, but you might not follow any one of them. Because a consumer is very, very, how would I say, stingy when it comes to really, that's the actual word, in giving you a follow or a subscribe and things like that. So when they give that, they really expect that level of content. They connect and resonate with that individual's personality, their behavior pattern, whatever their background might be. So which is the reason why it gives the brand an instant insight into whatever avenue they're looking at. So if I were to possibly look at any brand, look at any influencer, and if I wanted to get it to say 5 million people, so out of those 5 million, I know that at least 1 million will look. So that becomes an instant avenue for me to get to those guys. Right?
I just want to give you an example of what we've just done about 2 months ago. So memes, for example, have become a way of communication. Similarly, ranting has become a way of communicating. And it has been doing the rounds for the last 5-6 years. So what we did for Magic Moments actually was a very cool campaign, which was led by an actor called Singh. You must have seen him in movies and all, with Kartik Aaryan. And one of the brand ambassadors that we have is Kartik Aaryan, which is why the association. So we did a series of short films with them, with Sunny Singh, where he was ranting about daily things. It may be the COVID situation, it may be his girlfriend, it may be anything. How we use influencers was to actually rant once the videos hit our social handles, our digital assets. To take it forward, what we did was we tied up with influencers like Kusha Kapila, Apar Shakti Khurana, etc. to come up with their own rendition of a rant. What is bothering them and how can they rant about it. How we use influencers was, think of it just using them as a medium, or as a media actually. So for example, if these guys are putting out, like Bhavya rightly said, first of all, it is important to recognize what is the kind of users that they have. Does it resonate with my target audience, right? If it does, then you use it as a use it as a media. If this guy puts out a rant, if Kusha Kapila puts out a rant and 2 million people see it, I'm basically disseminating my communication, my campaign to those 2 million people and telling them that there is such a thing that the brand is doing, and you can also become a part of the bandwagon by participating and sending in your own rant. So although there were these 6-7 videos that we put out there, and just 4 major influencers in the form of Kusha Kapila, Apar Shakti, and 2 more, we got over 5,000 people to actually come up with their own rants. It may be about their boss, it may be about their office situation or whatever. Actually send out videos to us, tagging our page and creating huge amount of UGC. So it was a classic example of how, influencers triggered a UGC activity, and both the things came together to create a successful campaign.
And more often than not, you would see that one and the other go hand in hand. Like you mentioned, we also did a similar thing. We did a reel challenge on our latest campaign, Make Play with Flavor, right? So there were influencers who put out their videos and then they asked their followers to remix their reels. Remix is it's an amazing format to create engaging content. So that I think results was pretty similar. The number of influencers we partnered with, we got 3x number of users to participate. So that's where I think both things go hand in hand, and there's no brand who would not focus on UGC, because that's where a lot of, like I said, brand love comes from.
Okay, we have time for just last couple of questions. I know the gentleman also raised the hand, but I think the mic's already gone behind. Please.
Hi, that was really good session. I actually wanted to ask, with Bira as well as any of the brands that Radhe Ko Kehtan is associated with, they're old brands. Like, they're something that people were aware of for a while. Like, I remember Bira did a lot of offline marketing when it came, because alcohol at the end of the day is an experience, right? So for something which is new, which is the brand is new and even the company is new, getting into digital space where experience matters a lot, how do you do that? Like, Greater Than did a very good job in that. So how do you create a space which for yourself in an already crowded, place, especially for craft drinks, etc. So what is the starting point beyond, say, influencer marketing?
Sorry, what was the last?
Beyond influencer marketing.
So I think the first thing is to understand the space and build an identity that is beyond the clutter. I think, like you said, I don't agree Bira is old. We're just 6 years into the industry. But the first thing that would strike you about the brand is the way the identity has been created, right? Irrespective of what the product is. That's right now, I'm not getting into that part. So the first part is analyze the space, understand what is that identity that will make you stand apart from what's already there. Like we were talking about digital fatigue, right? There's overload of information, so you have to do something different, and it starts with who you are as a brand. Once that is done, I think then you follow, like I said, reach, relevance, resonance. What will give you the right reach in terms of identifying the target audience? Identify your niche. Maybe you don't need to go mass. Then in terms of relevance, which are those mediums where your target audience consume content? Maybe start small. Once you've evaluated, experimented, then go big. And then you will be able to evaluate what is helping you create that trust with the brand. I think it's a very simple process. Digital also has the potential to make it very complex. I think the beauty would lie in the simplicity. If you just create that framework for yourself, you will have all the answers in front of you. I mean, that would be a very short answer. But if that framework is followed, I can assure you that it'll help you move to the next level.
I think Bira is the answer to the question. It's not a very old brand. It already entered a very cluttered space which was already occupied by giants like Kingfisher and whatnot. And they've been able to revolutionize the beer industry. I mean, getting wheat beer accepted, for example. There were only international players as far as the wheat beer market was concerned, and create a specific different identity from all the other beer brands. And I think they have used digital very strategically and very well. So I think the answer to your question would be a case study of how Bira has actually used and gone about their business. But I just want to give you an example of another brand which is not part of the alcohol industry, which is Boat. I mean, if you look at Boat, I mean, JBL is my client. 5 years ago, when we started working with JBL, they did not consider Boat to be their competition. They used to actually not be comfortable when we mentioned Boat as their competition. But today, they have no choice but to accept Boat as their competition. And one of the major factors why Boat has grown is the digital space, how they've been able to communicate their communication to targeted audiences, how they've been actually, you said beyond influencer. I think it's also important to consider how you use influencers and not just, beyond or within the influencer space. It's very important to see how you've been using them. So I think vote is another example to your question on how a brand has been successfully able to kind of cut the clutter, use the digital space with influencers and beyond influencers as well.
I think even with influencers, like you rightly said, it's not always picking up 100 people. You might just have actually 4 to 5. Like actually, you just gave an example, right? So you just have to pick up those right people, and the most important step is what is it that they're doing. One, they could just pick this up and say, talk about your product. But the other is what's that subtle integration where you've also given the message and yet not made it an in your face ad of your product. If you are able to crack that balance, influencer marketing is a very powerful tool. It's often, to be honest, it's also abused, but it's a very powerful tool across all industries. And I've worked across industries, I've used it. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. But if you're able to put that thinking, it is a very powerful tool.
Great. If we can just move on to the last question for the evening. If there's any other questions post this, then please, we can always have a conversation offline since we were already delayed. So please, can we please have the mic to the gentleman?
Is it a fair statement to say that you'll use Instagram the most as a platform? Is it a fair statement to make that you'll use Instagram the most as a platform for social media over Facebook? Obviously,
I think
over
it keeps
YouTube?
changing. And Facebook, if you talk about 5-6 years ago, Facebook was the talk of the town. Now today is Instagram, but this is what I tell my team every single day, that we need to understand the DNA of digital and how it works. Platforms can change, so our communication cannot be, it has to be platform agnostic. Today there's Instagram, tomorrow in between there was also Snapchat. So you don't know what's coming up next. We have, as marketers, we need to understand the digital space. We need to understand the mindset of the end consumer and react accordingly. Platforms can keep changing, in my opinion. Of course, Vishal can add on to
I 100% agree. The short answer for today is yes. Instagram is at the core, but it's also 5 years back it was Facebook. TikTok was very big in between, right? And then suddenly the ban happened. So platforms will come and go, like he said. The intent is what you want to say, and then that keeps changing basis the platform. Like Instagram will always be visual, right? That's something that's very clear for us. But on Twitter, it has to be more engagement. You have to pick up topical days. If India has won the World Cup today, then you have to probably look at engaging with your consumers on that. So every platform has its own identity in terms of what works. Crack that, and then I think platforms can continue to change as long as you have your research and framework in place. Like he said, you will be able to work on any platform.
Yeah, so frankly, my just follow-up question to that, and a very quick one, is that if Instagram, my assumption is that Instagram is a predominantly urban platform, right? Not so much into tier 1, tier 2 cities. Let me say tier 2 cities onwards, right? So how do you reach out to those guys from a social perspective, especially given the fact that TikTok is not there anymore?
I think we've mentioned that a couple of times. The advantage, Instagram, you're underestimating. It has gone as deep as it can be, especially after the TikTok ban. That's one. And second is a point that I think the three of us have mentioned a couple of times is that digital gives you the opportunity to target. So I can target somebody sitting in a tier 4, so to say, town from my Instagram as easy as I can target somebody sitting in this room. So that's the advantage you get with not only Instagram, I think most of the platforms.
But having said that, I mean, Vishal is bang on saying what he just said. But whenever we work on a strategy, I mean, whenever we work on, let's say, a film a TVC that we are launching, and we need to go live on digital, we are not going to look at Instagram in isolation. There will be a combination of Facebook still, even though it's, we consider it to be Instagram to be the more evolved whatever version. But still, Facebook is a very, very important platform simply because if you have an Instagram account today, you had a Facebook or you still have a Facebook account, you still go to check your friends' birthdays on Facebook. Your pictures and your birthday party pictures and your holiday pictures, Facebook has become a repository. So you're not still deleting your Facebook account. YouTube again is very, very important. And then the advent of OTTs, whether it's Hotstar or Z5 and properties. When I say properties, I'm talking about, let's say, a Kaun Banega Crorepati or a Big Boss or a Roadies, for example. Depending on the kind of product you want to push becomes very, very important, right? So it cannot be a strategy is never made in isolation considering only Instagram. It can be a short-term campaign which can be specific to Instagram. But if you look at a bigger strategy, it has to cover all digital platforms, so to say.
And I think regional content collaborators, like content creators, are huge. So that's also a very big avenue which a lot of brands target. For example, for our variant Boom, we've collaborated with Kannada-based, Karnataka-based influencers, right? And it's local language content that they create, and that's given us an amazing response. A lot more than what you would get if the content was probably in English. So regional content definitely works, and that, like he said, you have to pick and choose where you have to fight what kind of battle. It'll always be a balance.
So if I may just add one point, which is how it's said, right? It's never good to put all your eggs in one basket. So ideally, in any activity, when it comes to marketing, no marketer will ever put all of their budget into only one stream, because that would be senseless. Unless you have a very challenging budget, then you obviously have to pick and choose the avenues that you are picking. Now, in that reference, if that's where your challenge is, then you will have to identify as a brand, as a marketer, that where is your consumer touch point and who are the ones you are targeting. That probably will allow you, if that's your question, because I know a lot of brands have faced that challenge. So maybe that can answer. Number two is I actually don't agree with you in terms of the reach for a tier 2, tier 3 city even. Because since the time TikTok is banned, if you speak to anybody on Instagram, Reels is the future. And you'll be surprised where Reels come from. The highest generation of Reels actually happens from some of these tier 2 cities. And that's one of the biggest communication points for Instagram, essentially. Apart from posts and stories, the sort of reach that Reels will give you, which they will also, I'm sure, vouch for, is just phenomenal. Great. Okay, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today, and thank you so much, Vishal, and of course Hargun as well, for being part of this panel. It was really interesting to have this conversation with all of you. So that concludes our second session and the overall conference schedule for Inspirit 2021. Thank you so much, of course, for being here, ladies and gentlemen. And I would just now request all of you to please just move outside. The walk around tasting has already started so that we can prepare for the awards in the evening. All of you naturally are invited to the awards, which will be starting at 7:30. So please, a huge round of applause for all our speakers, all of you in the audience as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to seeing you soon.